I'm going to sort of break this into 3 very short bits. The things that are missing, I'm going to do a little bit about entertainment, which I guess is the bridge to the last session. A little bit about webcasting and scalability and all of those sorts of things. And a little bit about how people actually work with online technology. And the main thing that I'm going to start with is, of course, interface, which people typically at technology conferences don't actually talk about a great deal. They talk about content discovery, they talk about a whole raft of technology issues like CDNs and things like that, but they don't talk about how people actually interact with technology. And as a lot of researchers who've worked on projects like telehealth projects, for example, will tell you, it's actually the interface between the device and the consumer that's one of the most crucial pieces. Well, not just the consumer, actually the medical practitioner. It might even be just the person who's actually having to actually interface with the equipment. This is true of webcasting, it's true of on-demand video, it's true of telehealth, it's true of everything. Flipbook's an application a lot of people like because they like it for the interface, right? It's a very limited interface in terms of the ways that you can interact with content. It does a very specific thing very well, but it only does it on one platform. And that's another problem that we have when we come to technology problems, is that in this space, in broadband, is that you're accessing content over a whole plethora of devices. And these days, people expect, particularly if they're receiving content, they expect it to be on every platform. That's very expensive. One of the reasons it's very expensive, of course, is that each of the platforms is completely different. And it's very expensive because of the engagement model for consumers. Right? So if you're going to try and, say, do an entertainment platform and you want to sell it to consumers and you're not the ABC, which is a colossal brand in Australia, but you're perhaps smaller, then you've got a problem. The big problem you've got is getting people to download your app. And that's the first enormous step you have. The second problem you've got is that once they've downloaded your app, getting them to use it more than once is absolutely very, very, very difficult. And when you consider that applications like Facebook and Flipboard and things like that are phenomenally popular and people are using those 100,000 times, you can see how the stats can be skewed even further. If you build an app, they may not come. And in fact, overwhelmingly, they will not come. Moreover, you will have to support that app on and on and on and on through all the various life cycles of iOS, through the various life cycles of Android. You may have come across the term abandonware. Abandonware is where developers develop things for iOS 3 and it didn't sell very well, so they just don't do anything else with it. And iOS is a lot more forgiving than Android in that regard. If you develop something for Android 2.3, chances that it'll behave very differently on the new iterations of Android are very high. One of the reasons that the app stores, it's so hard to get apps and things in there, is that these stores are terrible for content discovery. In the case of the App Store, Apple App Store, that's because it was originally built to sell music, and the whole ontology of the platform is built around discrete objects that don't get updated a lot. Music tracks do not often get updated. The other reason is that both of these companies are highly invested in their own content offerings and their own keeping people attached to their own screens. They're not actually invested in your product at all. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Everybody talks about social as the engagement model. Let's get everybody on our platform through social. Social's been pretty much done. It's been pretty much done to death, all right? Social is, these guys probably built the best, I think, probably the most thorough form of social integration. Only really works in the United States, unfortunately. It's all about TV and online, and it's kind of taking things like the recommendations algorithms of Netflix, some of the interface lessons from a few other people, and a massive data, mashing them all together. And like modern recommendations engines, not asking you what you like, but just looking at what you actually do. Building an enormous database about what you commented on, how long you watched a video for, whether you shared it with somebody, all of that sort of stuff. It's got a very, very thorough. There's about 5 or 6 platforms that do this really well now. Of course, none of them are integrated into other people's platforms. All of these things are sort of siloed. So if you're on one, you're probably not on the others. And once you've invested in one, you kind of tend to be stuck on it. So again, you've got that sort of fragmentation of things, and trying to get something like this to pay attention to your content is hard. The aftermath of all of this, though, at the same time this is happening, is we're seeing big changes in the way that the social media networks themselves sustain themselves. You may have noticed that you're only getting 15 to 20% results in terms of reach. Of all of the people who have liked you now, the number of people who are actually getting impressions in their timeline from your sponsored page is decreasing. And the reason it's decreasing is because Facebook needs now to raise money, and so they're trying to sell sponsored links. And that means that people who previously had sponsored pages are not being seen. You have to give Facebook money now to guarantee that you'll be seen by all the people who are following you. And that's marking a really big change in social media. The aftermath of that is going to be quite ugly, because it's either going to translate towards people looking for increased spends on social with decreasing returns. And the reason that returns are decreasing is you can't guarantee that the people who are on those likes pages, for example, are actually people in the demographic that are actually going to interact with your product. They may have, in fact, been bought from a content farm or something like that in India. That sort of pretty much says it all. When people are engaging with the second screen, they're not engaging with your content. They may be helping to evangelize your content, but this comes back to the two-way thing about discovery and interaction, is that social media is great for people to find things by themselves. It's actually quite terrible for you to evangelize stuff. Problem with video chat for these guys is they can't actually figure out what it's for. Right? What is video chat for? What's the purpose of video chat? They're using it now. They've sort of relaunched it after a few technical hiccups to basically trying to discover random people. It's not quite as bad as chat roulette, but that's kind of the direction they're going in. What are we communicating with? When we are actually sharing videos, when we are chatting online, when we are packaging things up and editing it and sending it out, what exactly are we communicating? What's the point of that particular communication? If it's purely social and it's just one-to-one, people are actually quite well served. One of the differences between entertainment and telemedicine is that bandwidth is actually not the big driver. Whenever I hear people talk about the NBN, criticizing it, saying, oh, it's all just to watch movies in better definition, completely missing the point, right? Absolutely missing the point. Consumers, oddly enough, don't actually care as much about the quality of the video that they're watching. They care about the content. And as we've discovered in Malaysia, where broadband is actually really terrible, people will actually watch a movie in 300 kilobits per second if they like the movie, right? High definition is lovely in your living room, but it's not the main driver. The main driver is actually the content. Telemedicine, on the other hand, completely different. High quality video is absolutely essential to the experience. If you don't have it, you don't actually have a product. So for entertainment, iteration is fine, right? Getting gradually better bandwidth is fine. For services like telemedicine, bandwidth is critical. Webcasting is easy, okay? Viacor's been doing it for 10 years. Bold claim to make. Webcasting is easy. Actually, it's really terrifying. If you're, I used to be in film and TV. You're in a television station. Live to air is exciting in a television station. Now, all sorts of things can go wrong. Now, just imagine if you took that live television station and you moved it to a room you'd never been in before, in a town you'd never been in before, with a communications tower that you'd never seen before, and a bunch of wires and things hooked together that you didn't understand, and you've got some idea of how hard it is to rock up to a conference and webcast it, right? I guess separates the good businesses from the bad, and the technologists from the people who are the practitioners, is you need to have processes around it. The technology now is dead simple. Anybody can do a webcast. You can do a webcast from your MacBook. You can do a webcast from your iPad. That's not the problem. The problem is, can you do it reliably? And there are a whole set of processes around webcasting that people don't take into account when they look at the usefulness of the technology. Just trying to get somebody on a Skype link for a conference can be a major adventure. And it's the processes around doing that that are as important as anything else. And in this space, very few people do work around process. They do a lot of work around technology.